You know, on an earlier segment, we talked about Lyme disease briefly, and at that point I mentioned that we would discuss it in greater detail, and so I'd like to talk to you about that today. And one of the things I want to make certain that people understand is that they may or may not remember ever having had a bite from an insect. And that is probably way overdone. And by that I mean probably as many as 85% of patients who are Lyme positive in their blood testing do not even remember getting a specific bite from an insect. So even though that's the most important mode of transmission, it's not one that is remembered by most victims of Lyme disease. So the other thing I wanted to mention was that for people who are having problem blood pressures, when they just can't get their blood pressure under control, no matter how many medicines their doctor puts them on or how much they watch their diet and all of that, they should probably have a Lyme test, because the neurotoxin that is released by the Lyme bacterium in the human body is that which causes blood pressure to probably be refractory to standard treatments. In other words, what I'm saying is, if you got a problem with your blood pressure, you need to get a Lyme test. And the Lyme test that I'm talking about, there are 3 in number. One is a Western blot IgG. The second is a Western blot IgM and Lyme test. And the third one is a C as in Charles, D as in David, CD57 test, which measures the number of a certain type of natural killer cell that's in the human body, and if it's below 60, about the only thing that can cause that, in fact the only thing according to studies, is Lyme disease. So it's a simple blood test, a pretty decent screening test to tell if you have Lyme disease. The blood test should be, the CD57 blood test should be sent off to LabCorp to find the answer, as that was the lab that was used to test the initial blood testing that proved that this was in fact a good indicator for Lyme disease, and it was LabCorp. So that's the lab we suggest, the only lab you use for CD57 testing. And the proper lab for Western blot IgG, IgM Lyme testing is IGeneX Laboratories in Palo Alto, California. Because any other lab just isn't accepted by the average Lyme doctor. And so it's very important that you get your test done at the proper labs in order to minimize any false negatives. I've rarely seen false positives at IGeneX Laboratories in Palo Alto, California, and in fact the results in my particular practice run about 50%. But of course I have a skewed practice. Most of my practice consists of people with fatigue, joint pain, memory problems, and sleep disturbance, all of which are symptoms of Lyme disease. So if you have a sleep problem, don't just write it off as being caused from a problem of stress and worry keeping you up. I'd rather be concerned first that you don't have Lyme disease. So it's an easy test to get the 3 blood tests that I mentioned. That would be the proper test to have if there's a chance you might have Lyme disease. Some of the other symptoms of Lyme would involve concentration problems, a problem with memory. Another symptom of Lyme disease would be a thing called Bell's palsy, where the nerves in the face cause the face to be paralyzed on one side, and it may get better later on. They're not sure what causes Bell's palsy, but I know because almost 100% of the time it's Lyme disease. And even if it goes away and gets better, don't let that fool you, because if you've ever had Lyme disease, if you've ever had Bell's palsy, you need to understand that you still have the Lyme disease that actually caused the Bell's palsy. And it can get worse and worse over time. Remember, we said that every 30 days, the Lyme disease doubles in population. And so every year you live, if you've got Lyme disease in your body, it's going to become amplified greatly until finally, by the time you're older and it's time for you to retire and have a happier life, what a sad thing it is to suddenly learn that you have Parkinson's disease, or you have MS or ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, and that you have a problem with your mind like Alzheimer's. Those things are really preventable if you understand that they're caused by Lyme disease, an infection that is for the most part transmitted by the bite of an insect. So, we ask that every time you get a bite of an insect, you see your doctor, but not just any doctor. Make sure your doctor understands about Lyme disease, because unfortunately the majority of doctors today don't understand about Lyme disease. And so you have to find out if your doctor is Lyme savvy. That means a doctor who has been trained in, who has studied in, and very often has had himself or herself Lyme disease. Okay, that's all for today, and we hope you'll watch those bugs.